Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 8 of season 3 of Star Trek Picard, called Surrender. And I have fewer complaints than usual in this episode, but I don't think this episode is great. They still left all the main mysteries hanging, they don't answer anything. It once again ends with a cliffhanger promising that the next episode will explain everything, but they did that in the previous episode, so I don't like the slow pacing of the season overall. So a lot of this episode felt like filler, but at least toward the end something was happening, something changed toward the end. So this will be a full spoiler review. And the episode begins with Vadik still in control of the ship, and she's threatening to execute every last motherfucking one of them, saying she will execute a crew member every 10 minutes until Jack surrenders himself. And Jack now has the ability to warg into other people, like in Game of Thrones, and to control other people with his telepathy. And he tries to use Picard's Admiral's access codes to take over the bridge using one of the crew members there, but Vadik catches him. And there are a lot of dragon scenes of her trying to pick who's the one who's going to die and all of that. And in the end, she vaporizes that bald Vulcan lady, who was actually my favorite minor character, so I was annoyed by that. I would have preferred if she killed that Bajoran guy or the lady with the vagina on her forehead, because I actually really liked the bald Vulcan lady, so I would have preferred to keep her around and not the vagina face. And meanwhile, we see Riker and Troy being in a cell together on the Shrike, and they talk about having been tortured and how Riker couldn't stand watch Troy being tortured, and that's why he gave his codes to the changelings, even though those were the fake codes, which only alerted Picard. And so what's the big deal about giving the fake codes to the enemy? But anyway, my problem with the scene is how come Troy has no visible sign on her whatsoever of having been harmed in any way. She has not a single scratch on her, while Riker is all beaten up. And also she seems to be in such a good mood, she's telling jokes and stuff like that, so there are no signs at all that she was harmed in any way. And I'm glad they kind of skipped all that part. I didn't really want to watch them being tortured, and so I'm fine with all of that stuff being off screen. But at least when they show the aftermath, at least have some kind of evidence that it happened, except the dialogue, and yet there is none, because Troy in such a good mood. And she tells Riker that when she was kidnapped, a changeling came to her house looking like him, and that he was good in bed but bad at making pizza. So I guess it was a joke, but Riker kind of seemed concerned for a moment. And now that I think about it, isn't Troy the same age that Loxana was in TNG? So shouldn't she be going through the phase, which is like the Betazoid menopause, in which their sex drive quadruples or more, and they will sleep with anything that moves and all of that? So maybe her joke about sleeping with the changeling actually would make sense if she was in that stage right now, and that would make it even funnier. So anyway, why did the changelings put them in the same cell in which they can comfort each other, and Troy is doing like a therapy session on Riker, and they talk about their tragedy and all of that, and they reveal that Troy was telepathically manipulating Riker to dull his pain about losing his son, so she took that pain to herself, and that's why he felt nothing, which is what he talked about earlier. And that's an ability that Troy never really had. She could sense others' feelings, but she couldn't take away their feelings. I guess they have a special bond or something, so I guess it's okay. But a lot of this stuff feels kind of like soap opera kind of filler, so a lot of it wasn't really that necessary, and the fact that they're in such a good mood and all of that after supposedly being tortured for days doesn't really make much sense. And then a changeling comes to their cell, presumably to torture them again, and suddenly a sword comes through his chest, and he falls down dead, and it's Worf. And I kind of facepalmed at that moment because, there was that scene 2 episodes ago when Worf promised Picard, I will do whatever it takes to get Riker back and all of that, so I assumed when he went away that maybe he goes to the Klingon Empire to recruit the help of his friends. His family is really powerful in the Klingon Empire. So maybe he will finally get the Klingons to help him out. Maybe a whole fleet of Klingon ships will arrive to help against the Shrike with a whole team of Klingon ninjas with him and all of that. But I guess they had no budget for it. So he came alone on a small cloaked shuttle. So I guess he either borrowed the Titan's cloaking device or he took a different one from the Klingons, but didn't get any additional Klingon warriors and just came alone with Raffi on a small cloaked shuttle and sneaked on board the Shrike, and then once again stabbed someone from behind. And it's starting to annoy me how many times he killed people from the back in this season. He always sneaks up behind someone without warning and stabs them from behind, which seems kind of dishonorable. And why didn't he simply use a phaser? He used the phaser a second later to vaporize that same changeling. Somehow the sword coming through him made him collapse, so I guess because they have internal organs now, if you stab them, they do kind of almost die, and then he vaporizes him. So why didn't he just use a phaser from the start? Why the need to first stab him and then vaporize him? I guess maybe he didn't want the beam to accidentally hit Riker and Troy from the other side, so maybe that's why. But still, it is annoying to me that he always sneaks behind people and kills them without them knowing, because it seems kind of dishonorable. You know, the reason that Klingons were using swords in the older shows was as part of an honorable duel, as part of a fair fight, basically. But Worf this whole season has been sneaking around people and stabbing them from behind by surprise, which seems kind of stupid if he has a phaser. So if you're going to kill them, why not just vaporize them in a less painful way? Why the need to first stab them and then vaporize them? And so this was really funny to me. And then they come to hug Worf, and he doesn't like hugs. He says he needs his personal space. And then he tells Diana he's been counting the days since he last saw her and all of that, and it makes Riker kind of uncomfortable that Worf almost sounds that he still loves Diana and stuff like that. So that was kind of funny. And then they just go around the ship freely, and Raffi is there, and they find the remains of Picard's body, which is what the changeling stole. And I keep screaming at the screen, why don't you just vaporize it immediately? If that's what the changelings want, just vaporize it, and then they won't have it, and yet they don't. But then they explain that what the changelings wanted was just to extract the portions of his brain which contains the Iromodic syndrome. That's what they wanted for some reason, which is not yet explained. It's the same structure that Jack has in his brain, so I guess that's what gives him the superpowers, the telepathy, the ability to take over other people. But Picard never had any such ability. Maybe they're confusing Picard with Xavier from X-Men. They think that Picard in the show is Xavier, and the changelings want this ability to be able to control the minds of other people, to take over the whole Federation, to do their bidding, or what. So in the end of the episode, they destroy the Shrike with Picard's body. So I guess my theory of them resurrecting Locutus goes out the window. It's not going to happen anymore since Picard's body was vaporized. And on the one hand, I'm kind of relieved that it's not going to happen because it was kind of a silly idea. On the other hand, I'm worried what they're actually going to do is going to be even sillier. And you know, the whole thing with Picard's Iromodic syndrome being misdiagnosed and it's actually something else than what they thought. Maybe because he mind melded with Sarek and with Spock, and being implanted the memories of a whole lifetime in the episode Inner Light, and being Locutus, and all the weird stuff that happened to him. Maybe that affected his brain somehow, but how the hell would that become genetic and get passed down to Jack? It doesn't really make much sense. So how come Picard never had such superpowers, and yet Jack, who inherited the same disease, somehow does have those powers? And so they better explain it in a way that makes sense, which I kind of doubt they will. So anyway, Worf and Raffi save Riker and Troy and take them on the cloaked shuttle back to the Titan. And I'm wondering, why didn't they try to take over the Shrike? Wouldn't that be more beneficial instead of just running away? Or at least leave a bomb on the ship or something, leave a phaser on self-destruct next to their warp core, something like that, but they never even tried that. And meanwhile, Jack comes aboard the bridge of the Titan to surrender himself, but he brings along what looks like a small bomb and threatens to blow everyone up, including himself. Unless Vadik allows the other bridge officers to go, and she agrees, and I'm thinking, why is she agreeing? That's the only leverage she has over him. If she lets everyone else go, then he might blow himself up with her to save the rest of the ship. So why not leave all the hostages next to him so that he won't? And so it doesn't really make sense that she agreed to that, but I guess she's just crazy and stupid, so that's the explanation. And meanwhile, Geordi is working on Data, trying to help Data take over control from Lore so that he can help them retake the ship. And it's also funny how in the very beginning of the episode he unplugged Lore from the computer so that he wouldn't do any more damage. And I'm thinking, what possible damage he can do when the bad guys have taken over the ship anyway, so it cannot be any worse than that. So it doesn't really matter at that point. So anyway, they plug him back to the ship's computer in the end, and Geordi releases the barrier between Lore and Data so that they can fight it out, and then we have a scene taking place inside their minds in which they're mentally fighting each other, which was kind of neat, and it was full of member berries. We see Data looking at all his memories from his life on the Enterprise, so he sees a Spot and he sees that little device with the hologram of Tasha Yar, so I guess that's the only cameo of Denise Crosby we're going to see in this show, the same old hologram from the early seasons of TNG. and Lore is being evil, and he steals all his memories and takes them as trophies for himself, and Data apparently gives it all to him as a gift. And then Data kind of dissipates and disappears, and Lore takes over the body, and Geordi sees that it all turned red, it's all Lore now, and oh no. But then suddenly Data re-emerges and says because he gave all his memories to Lore, it turns Lore into Data, and so Lore dissipates, and then Data wins, and so a lot of this stuff could have been kind of silly, but I think Brent Spiner's acting kind of sells it, and so it is okay. The only issue I had with the scene is that his age is way too obvious in the scene. Maybe it's because it's too bright. Maybe that's why they make everything so dark in the rest of the show, so that we wouldn't see all the wrinkles or the age of the actors. Maybe that's why everything is so dark in all the other scenes, because Data doesn't look as old in the normal scenes on the ship, and yet in this scene inside his mind where everything is so bright, he just looks way too old, and I wish they would have fixed it with some digital de-aging or better makeup or something, so maybe fans can do that later, because that was the only thing that was kind of distracting. Even though I guess they're now in a synthetic body, now they look old, now it makes sense in the context, and it's all inside their mind, and so they don't have to look young, but still it was just kind of distracting. It was nice to see all the items from TNG, and it didn't feel like just more member berries because it was part of the story. It wasn't just there just to be references for the sake of it, but it was actually part of what's going on in the story, and that's why I think it's acceptable this time. So overall, I kind of enjoyed the scene. Overall, I think it's fine, and in the end, Data wins, and later on he says that he now has emotions and he has the ability to use contractions, so basically he became a real boy finally, which was his wish from the first episode of TNG. He said he wants to be human and all of that, and so finally it happened. And actually this is exactly what I predicted. I think when I just saw the trailer of this season, I said maybe they'll have Lore in the beginning, and then Data will somehow take over his body and become an improved Data with emotions, being like a human and all of that. So I kind of predicted it's going to happen. So all of this is obviously fan service, giving us exactly what we want, but I'm kind of fine with it in this case, because it just fixes the stupid decisions they made previously. And his brain is still positronic, so he hooks up to the ship's computer and is able to control the ship. And then Jack reveals that the bomb he was holding was not actually a bomb, but some kind of a personal force field. And he uses it to shield himself and Seven inside a small bubble, and then they open the bridge view screen into space, so I guess it was a window all along, just like in all the new Trek shows. And then they suck all the changelings out, and before Vadik gets sucked out, she says, "fucking solids," and then gets blown out into space. So that was kind of funny and satisfying, and then we see her flying through space toward the Shrike, and she's all frozen, and then she crashes into her ship and shattering into a million pieces, and I was half expecting them to later show that all those pieces became liquid again and morph back into Vadik, and she didn't really die, just like the T-1000, but instead they show that they fire torpedoes at the Shrike and totally destroy the Shrike easily. So why didn't they do that earlier if that was possible? Why didn't the Shrike have shields? Did Worf and Raffi sabotage the shields? If they had a line like that, that would have explained it, then it could be nice. And then we see the changelings on the Titan suddenly confronted by Raffi, who takes out two swords and starts slashing and killing all the changelings. And suddenly they don't have any weapons anymore, so they cannot shoot her. And suddenly they also have swords, and they have a ninja fight in the corridor, and she kills all of them easily. And so that scene was absolutely ridiculous. It reminds me of the Romulan warrior nuns from the previous seasons. And in Discovery, you know, the warrior nuns who keep fighting everyone with swords, and everyone suddenly don't have any phasers or any long-range weapons, and suddenly everyone has swords for absolutely no reason, except the show wanting to have a sword fight on the screen, but it makes no sense. And then Worf just vaporizes the last changeling from behind, once again attacking someone from behind without warning in a cowardly way. So if they have phasers, why didn't she just shoot them in the corridor right away? What was the point of going against them with swords? And how come they don't use their changeling powers? That's the most annoying thing in this whole season. You know, if they didn't have the budget to do the changelings justice, to do them properly, then just don't do the changelings. They could have been just a group of mercenaries who are working for the changelings. Or make them possessed by the conspiracy bugs from TNG. I think that would have been better overall, because at least it would be an excuse why we don't see the shapeshifting powers, but making them be changelings and then not using the powers makes absolutely no sense and just annoys me. because it's such a missed opportunity. You know, when they first revealed the changelings in episode 3, I was really happy because I thought they're finally going to do them even better than in Deep Space Nine. You know, with today's technology, it's easier and cheaper than back then, so maybe they can finally play with that idea in an even better way than they did in Deep Space Nine. So that's what I was expecting after that reveal that the changelings are the villains of the season. I was expecting to see some changeling stuff, and yet we barely saw any of it. And so in the end, it's just disappointing and illogical. So it would have been better off to simply do the conspiracy bugs. They could have had the same exact overall story, but not feel as stupid and illogical as it is in the show. So they do have the excuse in the show that the changelings here are different than the one from Deep Space Nine. So that can explain away a lot of the contradictions that I would have been complaining about otherwise, like Vadik keeps smoking all the time, even though in Deep Space Nine it was stated that Odo doesn't have a respiratory system of any kind, that he doesn't breathe air, that he doesn't have a sense of smell. And so if not for the fact that they said that these changelings are different and they can create the internal organs and all of that, I would have been complaining a lot more. So at least they had some kind of an excuse in the show, but it's still not enough to justify the fact that in some scenes they do seem to be able to morph and change shape and become liquid, and yet they barely do it most of the time when they actually need to do it. Also, in one scene in this episode, Jack keeps saying that he's not a changeling, he cannot be a changeling, but no one ever accused him of being a changeling, no one said anything like that, but for some reason, he keeps telling everyone, I'm not a changeling, as if he thinks that's why Vadik wants him, because he's also a changeling. So they didn't yet answer this basic mystery box of what exactly is happening with Jack, who is the entity trying to contact him, why he keeps seeing the red door, what's behind that door, and once again they leave it for a cliffhanger till the next episode. Even though in the end of the previous episode Vadik said, it's time you know what you really are and all of that, and yet they don't answer anything. And in the end, after they blow up the Shrike, Troy finally decides to be useful in this season and sits down in a therapy session with Jack to try to telepathically help guide him to discover what's hiding behind the door, and that's where the episode ends. And so once again, teasing us with this endless mystery until the next episode. So that felt kind of annoying. Maybe they should have ended the episode after the reveal, show to us something interesting about it, and then end the episode. Then it would have been more satisfying. And if it was an interesting twist, an interesting reveal, we would have been even more hooked up to see the next episode, if it's something interesting. So I kind of suspect it's going to be something dumb and idiotic and illogical, but I'm not going to complain about something I don't yet know, so I guess I'll wait and see what the brilliant twist is, and so I'm not going to complain about it before I actually see it. And what I did like in the episode is that in the end, they finally have the whole team back together, after they all reunite, and then they sit down in the conference room around the table, and they even say, oh, it's been such a long time since all of us have been around the table and all of that, so that's cute. So finally the crew is back together, but it's almost the end of the season and only now it happens, and so it should have happened way earlier. I'm still angry at Patrick Stewart because it was his insistence, his demand not to make the show about a TNG reunion. At first he wanted the show to be only about him, and instead he got a new team of new characters for some reason. So why couldn't it have been a TNG reunion from earlier on? Why did they have to postpone it till the very end of the last season to give the fans what they wanted? But at least we finally are getting it. And I'm betting in the last episode we're going to see them all on the Enterprise D, which was restored in the Fleet Museum, and they're all going to come back on the bridge of that ship and take their old stations to a final voyage into space or something like that. So I'm betting in the very end it will be a proper TNG reunion, but it's going to be just one scene in the end. And I do think if the whole show was just about that, that would have been silly, so I do kind of half understand why they didn't want to do that. They want to do things differently and not just recycle the exact formula from the past. And so I don't mind things being different, I don't mind new things, I don't mind the characters themselves changing a little bit, as long as they still feel like the same people. I just wish it would have been done better. And this season did have a lot of good things as well, but it also has a lot of filler, a lot of boring and illogical things. And so overall, it's not really that great of a show. It is much better than season 1 and 2, which I guess it cannot possibly be any worse than that, but it's still not such a great show as some people have been praising it. I think there's a lot of missed opportunities, a lot of missed potential. It could have been much better than it is. But at least in the end of this season, if we simply edit out all the stupid stuff and all the filler, all the unnecessary stuff out, and just leave all the good bits, it will be a good 2-hour movie. Unlike the previous seasons, which I'm also planning to do that with, but I'm not even sure it will be a good movie. Maybe a decent movie in the end, after I remove all the stupid stuff, but there is so much stupid stuff that it's almost impossible to take all of it out while still leaving a coherent storyline to make any sense in the end. So I think it will be easier to make a nice fan edit of this season and just turn it into a really good 2-hour movie in the end, without all the filler, without all the soap opera, without all the silly stuff. And in the end it will be a good movie, which is better than all the old TNG movies. And so in the end of the day, I'm happy about this season being better than the previous ones, but I guess we'll wait and see how it all ends, because it all depends on that. Will it all make sense in the end, or will it all fall completely apart like in the previous seasons and will be totally stupid? I guess we'll wait and see. So that's all I had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.